Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Alright, kiddies. This includes you pathetic bastards who role-play, you true believers, you skeptics, you doubters and you survivors. I have a story to share, and it has ended as well. A few years ago, November 2008, the Thursday before Thanksgiving, I was out hiking in the Santan Mountains here in Arizona. The air was cooling off finally from our fucking ridiculous summer, the glories of having an altitude of 2 feet above hell heat. The sky was clear. It was later in the afternoon and I had gotten off of work from the loading dock position I had nearby. I drove up to a trail, parked and began hiking. About 45 to 50 minutes on this trail, I happened upon what appeared to be a recently uncovered shrine. There was a necklace made of bones on there and something that I immediately recognized as dried blood. Me being an idiot, I picked up the necklace out of curiosity and decided to take it to my grandpa. He knows all sorts of shit about Native Americans. So I pocket the thing and turned to leave the place because daylight was burning and I needed to wash up before I had supper. I barely noticed the sounds of rustling foliage and the sensation of being watched, scrutinized, hunted. At the time I lived with my grandparents, so it was no big detour or anything to see Grandpa about this thing. I get home, wash up, forget about it until that Sunday. I had noticed a couple strange happenings, but didn't think anything of them. Interesting but very common things. Hawks in the city, Mesa, Arizona. Nearby Keno Jr. High School to give you all a rough idea. The odd vulture flying overhead. A coyote that found its way in town. I show this thing to Grandpa that Sunday. He tells me it looks like some old fetish charm. Possibly of a long-dead shaman. I explained how I found it and he sat there scratching his head and pondering. Tells me that it was definitely bones for the beads. Human finger digits, javelina tusks and teeth, the odd tortoise shell piece. So he advises me to throw it out or try to take it into a museum since it's an old part of an old and dying culture. I put it in my top dresser drawer and forget about it until that March. From that Sunday until that day in March, there was an increase of activity outside my window at night. Rustling bushes, animal sounds, claw scrapes. I would barely open one eye and then dismiss it. Feral cat, stray dog. The odd owl, maybe a tortoise's shell scrapping the bricks outside. I would think these things to myself before falling back to sleep. I found it on a day off in March. I want to say it was a Tuesday morning and I was cleaning out the room. There it was. That night things escalated. Growling, rumbling and guttural snarls, hissing, screeching, shaking, slamming. I woke up uneasy that next morning and promptly remembered just what the fuck I had and where I found it. I got out of work early that day and went back to the mountain and back up that trail. The little shrine, a series of flat rocks that were very obviously arranged by hand, was still there. Scratches and scrapes new in the stone, dried blood, pieces of fur and hair. I put the necklace back down and made to get the fuck out of there. When I had bent over, I didn't notice the blurred figure in some brush about 50 yards over. I only noticed a slight whizzing sound and then looked over at some faint, clacking, noises. A bird or mouse rib hit a rock and bounced to the ground. It was very obviously sharpened. I got the fuck out. Just in time too because I began to hear others nearby. At least 5 people. They had to be people. I didn't want to wait to talk to the fuckers, so I got out of there. The last thing I remember was looking in the rear view mirror, and I would swear to God that I saw either a bear or the biggest fucking javelina I'd ever laid eyes on bolting into some bushes out of sight. I had hoped that the noises would stop, but they didn't. That night there was a scraping at the window, very obvious paw outlines hitting, rocking the pane of glass. It got worse from there. I noticed animals watching me far more than ever before, following me. I dismissed it as coincidence. Hawks taking the same perch, while I was at work. One day I had talked the camera operators to turn the second employee entry camera to a light post. A single hawk sat there perched all fucking day. Kids threw rocks at it. All the thing did was look down at them and screech. They ran. The bird stayed. Its head wouldn't move from facing the direction of the door at work. The camera operator gave me a few contact numbers. She's half Apache, and had me talk to people on reservation lands about this. Nobody wanted to help me. I went door to door in a place called Sacaton, asking for help, information, anything. They slammed the door in my face, spat at me, prayed and chanted, pushed me away. One woman, a haggard-looking thing who lived far out on the outskirts, barely on the town's borderline in a decrepit-looking double-wide trailer, was the only one who remotely seemed interested in helping me. She had the presence about her. To quote a joke my mom had when she just felt something was off, bad juju. Well, this hag was bad juju. Bad vibes, bad idea rolled into one mess that I began wanting to avoid at all costs. She listened to my story. I would not drink anything she offered. I would not eat anything she offered. I would not sit anywhere she offered. There was something wrong there. It was like evil was in the air itself. Like I was in a wolf's den and the pack was about to be back soon. She told me that I disrupted her rituals when I finished. She was the leader of what she ultimately called the Covenant. There are 12 others who make up parts of this group. They devoted themselves to various practices of dark arts, magics, practices and rituals from all kinds of cultures, religions and societies. I was to pay in blood for my trespass on their ground. She pulled a knife on me and lunged. I am at least 4 times her size, 2XL shirt size bigger. I not only swung my arm out and hit the inside of her knife arm, but followed with a swipe from my other arm, more or less smashing her aside. I stormed out of there, pulled out and floored it in my beat as Oldsmobile barely as a handful of trucks and cars appeared around the corner speeding to this place. I reported this attack to the police. They say the place I went to had been abandoned for years. No signs of anyone living there could be found. Not even furniture. It had been a vacant and foreclosed lot and trailer, for a few years, as they said. The noises continued for ages and ages after. I ended up moving in up the road, by Falcon Field Airport. The noises followed. This time no plants near my bedroom window but rocks and gravel that crunched underfoot. My window was almost broken once. My roomie at the time went outside twice with his 12-gauge. He said there was this big fucking coyote outside my window, sniffing, huffing, scratching at the glass. It snarled and bolted when he turned on the lights and tried to take aim. We were bothered sufficiently disturbed by this. A few months after, I ended up moving back in with Mom and Dad rather abruptly. The noises stopped for the 5 months I was there getting back on my feet after a job loss. I got a new job and a couple months later I had signed the lease on a 1-bedroom that was barely a 5-minute walk from my office. During all this time though, our dog and all the neighborhood animals were in a roar every evening. Barking, howling, snarling, mewing, even birds could be heard at night. Nothing ever at my window though. The noises picked up again when I was on my own. Rocks crunching underfoot, scrapes and rattles at the windows. I carried my knife on me while at home at night. Lights on. I had 2 portable spotlights that I got from the old job for free that had fresh batteries and functioned well, that were ready if the power went. One night, 3:33 a.m. Saturday, August 27, 2011. Something massive crawled and thrashed its way around my apartment's porch. It stood on 2 legs and dwarfed me in height. I only had a moment's notice before the glass of my sliding door blew inwards and this awful bellowing, roaring howl met my ears. The damn thing wasn't just in town, in the city, it was in my apartment complex. I didn't panic or get frightened or intimidated, or at least not in the usual way. I readied a paring knife and my surplus machete and bellowed what I can only describe as a war cry at it. Like its power alone defied the beast's efforts. Lights and noises came from all over the complex. The thing looked at me. Ruby-like eyes felt like they were piercing my soul met my own, and then it bolted. The police say that I must have had been in shock because this thing wasn't seen by anyone else in the complex. The only thing was left was a tuft of hair or fur and a lot of broken glass. The cops dismissed it as a failed break and entry. The perp probably saw you with a couple knives and said, "Fuck that," and ran. No monsters here, kid. That was the last close encounter I had for a while. Noises again. They were playing with me, toying with me. Always an animal watching me as I moved. Wherever I went, a hawk followed. I eventually moved out here where I am now in Apache Junction. My current roomie and I live and work together, so needless to say we both tolerate the other where possible. Some nights these things come all the way up to the side door of our place that leads straight into my door. Rattling, shaking the knob and door, windows on all sides rattling and shaking. Some nights I sit on the porch daring them. Coyotes, javelina, hawks, bats, I dared them in voice and body language. I made them know I wasn't afraid. And I made them know that I wouldn't be lured into the darkness. They would need to come to me if they wanted me. A series of bug nets surround the porch. Bones of bats, birds, mice and lizards and snakes sometimes get caught all over the nets while I sit out there, staring into the night, challenging them. It is now obvious that I am not the most sane of individuals. I do not have a fear reflex, and if it comes to fight or flight, I will not only hold my ground but take the opposition's ground from them. I just get angry when something frightens me. So there I've sat this last year. Finally the hag shows her face again. She entered the light where I could see her and she sneered at me. Then hissed, and from damn near nowhere, a knife in her hands slashed off the bug nets. I struck out immediately. We have couches on the patio from my roomie's old friends who more or less abandoned their furniture. I hurled a cushion at her and charged off the patio. She stayed in the light and I caught her with a heavy right hook. She felt like she was made of air. Too unnaturally light to be human. This memory alone disturbs me. I hit her and she just bolted. Took it and ran like the hit didn't even bother her. I was so furious, so pumped of adrenaline and bitter contempt and hatred I swore an oath. White ash lines my blades now. Challenge me again and you die. The neighbors here were less than pleased, but after that night their horses, chickens, donkeys and other animals in the area have stopped acting so strangely. TLDR, after years of being tormented by wannabe skinwalkers, I punched their leader who got cocky and haven't seen them since. So there you have it, X. It is just my one testimony. Most of you will never believe, but if you truly have been here as long as I and you know my name, then you know the power and sincerity of my word. You wanted a Skinwalker story. There you have it. One more chapter of my life that I wish I could just drink away. Countless nights without proper rest. Others just sitting there, glaring in the darkness, seeing them standing just out of reach or me being just outside their own reach. It would be giving them too much credit to say my life was a waking nightmare. It wouldn't be giving them enough credit to say that they weren't one of the most horrifying things that has ever existed on this planet. I'll let you all be the judge, but this is the truth. A truth I wish was just a bad dream.
I.e., I used to live in Glendale near Phoenix. I had some semi-weird shit happen to me there right next to an Air Force base. I've never really had any experiences with cryptids there, but I lived right by the Air Force base there and I can't tell you how many times as a kid I'd wake up and hear the weirdest shit in the skies. Like Transformers were doing anal in the sky with each other. As far as fucked up creatures and shit go, I once woke up and looked out my window and saw a UFO sitting in the middle of the street about the size of a smart car. I was about 3 or 4 years old. I got my older sister out of bed and showed her through my window and we both lost our shit but went back to bed. Didn't know it was aliens at the time, but I remember waking up and thinking something about, the Teletubbies are outside, and I immediately woke my sister up before even checking my window. That's the part that has me fucked up. Was I being mind controlled and shit?
So I used to live in a small town in Arizona. It was a nice town but very secluded and almost seemed like something from a horror movie at times. Anyway, lots of creepy stuff happened in this town. Just about every week I would hear a new story about some monster or ghost sighting. I never really believed anyone until I've had a few experiences of my own that I've decided to green text. Here's the first one. I believe it was around August 2012. Camping in the woods with my family. Around 2 o'clock decide to go take a piss. I didn't want to wake anyone, so I decided to go away from the campsite. I originally just wanted to walk a few meters away from the tent, but for some reason I walked until I couldn't see the campsite anymore. I'm still not sure why I walked so far to this day. As I'm pissing, I hear a noise. I figured it was just a deer at first, but it kept getting closer until eventually the noise stopped. After a while I spot something in the corner of my eye. It looked like an elk skull about 30 feet away, but I did not recall seeing it when I walked over here. Then it starts to move and at this point I'm frozen with fear. The skull was attached to what looked like a really skinny and tall man, except he moved abnormally. I start sprinting back to the campsite, terrified of what I saw. Once I arrive, I crawl into my sleeping bag and remain silent the rest of the night, but I know for a fact something was snooping around our tents. I could hear noises. Morning comes and everything seems normal. I just assumed what I saw was something of my imagination. However, a couple years later I Google Arizona monster sightings for shits and giggles, but I found out there have been similar sighting all around Arizona of what I saw that night. Eventually I find X and research more. I'm pretty sure it was a skinwalker or a wendigo. Part 2. These next ones are unrelated aside from taking place in the same town. These stories are about a house me and my friends would investigate. I was a freshman in high school at the time and it was a boring summer afternoon. Me, my brother, and our 2 friends decided to go into the woods and look for a supposedly haunted house. We knew what part of the woods the house was in, we just didn't know where the exact location was. We of course get lost for about 4 hours while looking for it. As we're wandering aimlessly through the woods, we hear a woman scream, but it sounded like it was coming from all directions. This freaked us all out, so we just started sprinting through the woods. As we're running away, we stumble across the house. It was beat down and just gave off an unsettling vibe. We do a quick walk through and get out of there. Nothing happened in that house the first time we visited, but then again we wanted to leave right away before whatever was screaming found us. My brother climbed a tree and found the way back to town. It only took us 18 minutes to get back, which made us wonder how we even managed to get lost for 4 hours. However, on our back we heard the scream again, except this time it was closer and coming from the direction of the house. We start running again, but we're not as scared because we're only about 2 minutes away from the town. We eventually make it back all in one piece and decide not to go back unless we have weapons. I have one more story about this place that I will be posting soon. Pick related, it's the house. Part 3. Here's the final story I have about the house. Probably the scariest experience for me yet. We decide to head back, this time armed with knives. I know we should have brought guns, but we could get any because the oldest in our group was 17 at the time. We don't get lost this time, so we get to the house pretty quick. As we're entering the house, I begin hearing voices. It sounded like little kids singing. Nope. I ask everyone if they can hear it too, but they just assume I'm messing with them and tell me to knock it off. It stops after a few seconds, but I know it wasn't my imagination. I swear on my life I heard voices at that house. We entered the house despite me telling them not to. This time a door is closed that we don't remember closing last time. We open the door and enter the room. The room was a mess and it wasn't from us. The floor was covered in papers with Bible verses written on them. The walls had holes in it and the furniture had been knocked over. In the middle of all the chaos, a single chair was in the middle of the room facing us with a book titled, "We Are Not Alone." We all decided to leave the house immediately. The next part of the story will take place in a barn on the property. Then that will be the end of this story. Part 4. This is the final story I'm telling today, guys, but I'm sure there will be more eventually. I still visit this town a lot and I'm planning on camping there again this year. I'm not going to say where the town is located because it would be pretty easy to find out who I am if I did. As we're leaving, my friend suggests we go into the barn and see if anything's in there. We were hesitant at first but eventually give in to our curiosity and decide to check it out. As we get closer, the wind picks up like crazy. Eventually all the windows slamming against the barn like there was a hurricane. This goes on for about 30 seconds then stops. But we can still hear something in the barn. We stop moving and listen to see what it was. It becomes clear that it's footsteps. Someone or something was in that barn. My brother peeks in through one of the windows to see who it is, but there was nothing. The entire barn was empty. We go in there to investigate more, but we still don't find anything. My friend brings over a plastic bag he found on a shelf with a worried look on his face. He empties it on the floor and a bloody rubber glove falls out of it along with what looks like human hair. As we do this, we hear footsteps outside of the barn. Now luckily they weren't near the exit, so we make it out at time before whatever was out there found us. That was the last time we went back to that house. That's my story. I'm planning on visiting the house again this summer, but I'll be alone this time.
We get meth heads like fucking crazy in my area. Not exactly spooky or supernatural, but this was a year ago. Be me. Middle of nowhere, Apache Junction. Sitting at home. Little brother takes dog out for walk. Comes back and immediately.
There's a dude outside with a machete.
Look out window. Fucker is just standing there in cargo shorts with a machete, staring at the house. Get my revolver. Tell brother to call the cops. Walk outside. I didn't know what to say, so I yelled something like, "Fuck off, yeah?" He stares at me. Sees gun. Drops his machete and bolts off into the night. Nothing ever comes of it. I chalked it up to him being a junkie or some shit, but honestly, I still don't know what was going on entirely. We still have the machete, pick related.
This happened just under 2 hours ago. Been on 4chan a long time but have hardly ever posted, especially on X. But, kinda felt like this story warranted it. My wife is out of town and so I have been home alone for a few days. I figured I'd go pay her horse a visit. It's been cooped up in its 12 by 12 stall for a few days without being ridden. I'm not a very good rider, so I just planned on turning her out to the arena they have over there. Guess the barn need an explanation. I live in Arizona, East Valley, technically in Mesa, but it's practically Apache Junction. The suburbs just kinda stop abruptly and turn to desert over here. I'm in the suburbs part, so I can't have a horse on the property. We pay to board our horse at a place just a few miles further northeast on a about 3-acre plot. There's people who live in RVs all year round there. When the snowbirds come it's packed, but right now there's only maybe 4 RVs. The land has a community tack room, where the saddles and stuff are kept, an office in the dead center. Just next to that is a few round pens and a larger arena, a big pen maybe 100 feet in diameter. Anyways, I take the horse out to the arena and just let her stretch her legs. I had her on a lead and walked her for a bit, then she heard something, but not me, and tried to bolt. I've handled horses enough to know how to calm them down. I forced her to run in some little circles to get her mind off of whatever freaked her out. More in a sec. Anyways. She was freaking out, calmed her down, walked her a bit, then she did it again. We did some circles. Happened 3 times, then she seemed to settle down. I let her loose and she sniffed the ground and walked, but every once in a while she'd flip out and almost buck, just out there on her own. No other horses bugging her or nothing. It's weird for her to do that. She's about 20, a quarter horse mix of some kind. She's usually pretty mellow. I figured that she was just all pent up from being stuck in her stall for a few days and laughed at her antics and talked to her, stuff like, "What you doing, girl? Hey, calm down," and stuff. After a while the sun was close to setting. I think it was maybe 8:05. The wind was blowing and bringing a real nice breeze. It's been about 115 degrees in the city. Out there in the desert it really cools down at night. I took her by the tack room to brush her and give her some fly spray, animal safe fly repellent. As I was brushing her I kept hearing a scraping noise on the corrugated steel roof of the tack room. Spooky, but there's a pale verde tree right next to it, so I figured it was just the wind scraping it. So I cleaned her up and started to walk her back to her stall when I heard more scraping. The tack room was on my left, the scraping was coming from the right, where the office is. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I put her in the stall and the other horses. There's a ton of stalls, maybe 50, but this time of year there's only a dozen or so, we're all antsy. I figured it was the wind. A lot of them are Arabian horses, they spook at anything. As I was walking back I went between the tack room and office again and heard the scraping. Then I realized that the scraping was coming from the office roof now. There's no trees or anything by the office. I look up and see a small black shape, maybe the size of a small cat or grackle bird, flit out of view from the edge of the roof. Figure, oh, it's just an animal. Then I heard something laugh. Fairly quiet, but it was my own laugh. I've heard myself in videos and stuff, and it was mine. Like, probably the same kind of laugh when I was laughing at the horses bucking. I froze and instantly wished somebody was there with me, but not, Just the quiet RVs, granted. Most of them had their lights on, which was reassuring, but they were far away. I nope away, towards my nearby car and hear from about the roof, "Whatcha doing, girl?" Nope much faster and get in the car. Frantically start it and nope even faster outta there. Turned on the radio just to hear somebody's voice other than whatever the fuck that was. I think it was a commercial about some concert. I guess Slipknot got postponed. But yeah, that's my story. I went to Walmart right after being around all those slobby people felt great and calmed me down. I was glad to be near other people. Now I'm at home with the dogs and the cats on my lap.
Dragons. Farther south is Tombstone, a 1800s boomtown that was the location of the famous gunfight at the OK Corral between the Clanton Gang and the lawmen, Wyatt, Virgil and Morgan Earp, and Doc Holliday. Tombstone was also once known for a dragon. According to Mysteries and Miracles of Arizona, by Jack Cutts, two cowboys rode into Tombstone on the 7th of June 1890 with the skin of what they claimed to be a giant flying lizard they'd killed outside town. The cowboys chased the beast on horseback before shooting and killing it. The dragon measured 92 feet long with an 80-foot wingspan, an 8-foot-long head, and eyes, the size of dinner plates, the cowboys claimed. The battle was captured in the 26th of April 1890 Tombstone Epitaph newspaper. Werewolves, in various forms, have existed in many cultures across the world. From the medieval European werewolf that dominates horror movies, to American Indian skinwalkers, the image of a man changing into a beast has terrified people for centuries. But, sitting safely in a cozy house, watching television, the werewolf stalking the night is nothing but legend. For a group of teenagers in Tempe, Arizona, that idea is dead wrong. From a 2009 interview, the glow of city lights bathed the Arizona night in gray as four teenagers walked onto the Shalimar Golf Course in Tempe. Carl Davis, now an adult, was in high school when he and his friends, bored with their weekly Bible study meeting, walked outside and onto the course.
My girlfriend says something like, "Hey, something just jumped out of that palm tree." The trees were approximately 35 feet tall, so the other teens laughed and resumed their conversation. A few seconds later she lets out a blood-curdling scream, just pure shock terror.
As Davis turned toward his girlfriend, he saw something he couldn't believe.
"I look in the direction and there's a creature lumbering along the wall towards us," Davis said. "It was as tall as me, 6 foot, hunched over, huge snout like a werewolf. The beast, blacker than the night surrounding it, lunged toward the teens and they ran. It was chasing after us, it was running along the wall toward me, and I just turned and ran. I didn't think to look back." The teens never saw the thing again, although something about the encounter still confuses Davis. "It was in the middle of town, that's what always gets me about that thing. Not out in the woods or at a secluded cabin, but in Tempe, Arizona."
8 years ago. Lived in Apache Junction, Arizona. Total shithole. Lived in a shitty HOA full of cul-de-sacs with the houses being less than 20 feet apart from each other. Wake up at 3 a.m. one night. Unusual feeling of dread is in the air. I hear a really weird fucking yowling noise that sounded like it was coming from the middle of my cul-de-sac. I seriously can't describe just how fucked up it was. The best I can describe it is a person and some kind of animal groaning at the same pitch. Hear heavy footsteps on the roof of my house. Hear footsteps on the roof of neighbor's house. Groaning gets even louder. I am scared shitless and it's at the point where I'm covering my ears. Stay awake with my ears covered until the sun comes up. Get ready for school and head out the door. Neighbors are in the middle of the cul-de-sac wondering what the fuck happened last night and talking about what we heard. There are stray cats hanging around, but there's no way in hell a cat was making those groaning sounds, and the footsteps sounded too heavy to be a cat. This starts happening more and more frequently. Neighbors plan on telling the HOA owner about this. HOA owner refuses to talk to them about it, threatens to call the police if we don't get away from his door. Move to Phoenix a few weeks later. Family never brings up those nights in Apache Junction again. I got some more Apache Junction shit to share if anybody's interested. Alright, here goes. This is the one that my friend and I call the garage incident. There's something really not right about Apache Junction, seriously. Outside my friend's house on the other side of the HOA. His parents don't allow anyone inside if they aren't home. He has his bedroom window on the second story open and we chit-chat for a while. About an hour into the conversation, there's a very loud banging on his house's garage door. It sounds like somebody is standing right in front of it and punching and kicking it as hard as they can. He's the only one home. Fucking nope.jpg. We both freak out and I go home spooked out of my mind. Later my friend tells me that he checked the garage after I left and nothing was in there. All the doors were locked. This never happens again. Our parents predictably don't believe us when we tell them. Here's one that me and the other ones who were there think is more cool than frightening nowadays, but at the time we were creeped the fuck out. I apologize in advance for this not really being a neighborhood story. Camping at one of Apache Junction's major lakes with family and some friends one weekend. Aunt decides to go check out the dam on the far side of the lake. Ends up getting her boat stuck on a reef with my dad and my friend on it. We spend a couple of hours getting it unstuck. It's starting to get dark. Sunlight gets more and more scarce by the minute. As we get the boat unstuck, my aunt sees something on top of the cliff near us and tells us to look at it. It's almost pitch black out now. See a dark figure on top of the cliff that looks like a giant-ass owl. The cliff's at least 100 feet high with that thing on top of it. It has piercing, glowing blue eyes. It's just perched on the cliff staring at us. Doesn't seem to look at anything but us. Nothing particularly menacing about it. We take a couple minutes to look at it. My aunt gets the boat moving. The thing takes off flying after we leave the area. Fast as a fucking jet. Never see it again. It's Apache Junction again. I got one last story to share. This was a few days before we moved back to Phoenix. Hanging out at my friend's house after hours. Nearest convenience store is half a mile away and it's 2 in the morning. We decide to head up there. As we're leaving the HOA area. Across from our HOA area there is a giant-ass landfill surrounded by desert fenced off with barbed wire. We both hear that same groaning noise coming from the desert and footsteps in the bushes. We don't make anything of it and spend another minute walking. The noise is following us. Groaning is even louder at this point and there is a dark figure in one of the trees. We nope the fuck out and bolt it back to his house.
Mogollon Monster is a type of Bigfoot originated from Mogollon Rim, Arizona. Reports of footprints, video, and hair samples have been documented, but no conclusive evidence has been found to date. The Mogollon Monster is reported to be a bipedal humanoid, with over 7 feet tall, has inhuman strength, and large eyes that some claim to be wild and red. Its body is said to be covered with long black or reddish-brown hair, with the exclusion of the chest, face, hands and feet. Reports claim it has a strong and pungent odor described as that of dead fish, a skunk with bad body odor, decaying peat moss and the musk of a snapping turtle. Behavior: it's said that the creature is omnivorous, nocturnal, and very violent. It is generally reported to walk with wide, inhuman strides. Leave behind footprints measuring 22 inches in length. It was said to produce whistle sound or scream and explore campsites during night. It also consumes deer and other wildlife by decapitating them.
God-damned Apache Junction was really someplace else when I lived there. Nowadays I don't know if it could just be attributed to sleep paralysis because I could move enough to cover my ears whenever I would start hearing indescribably freaky shit outside my house. For a little bit of background information, Apache Junction is a town in eastern Arizona that has always had a reputation for being haunted as hell. The whole place has a very warped energy about it, you can just feel it in the air. It's pretty difficult to describe unless you've experienced it yourself. So, there were some nights back when I was in 4th grade where I would wake up at 2 to 3 a.m. Kid me was terrified when I looked at the clock and saw what time it was because this had never happened to me before. Then, I heard a noise outside my house that was indescribably fucked up and I still vividly remember it to this day. It sounded like a cross between a person groaning and some kind of animal. It was 4 distinct vocalizations similar to a mule, but there weren't any in that shithole homeowners association. I got so scared that I covered my ears for a hot minute and then when uncovered them I heard whatever was out there, and this time it let out a shriek that first sounded like a man screaming bloody murder then transitioned to some ungodly howling that sounded like a person imitating a drawn-out crow's caw. But crows really don't live any further south than Payson in Arizona. The way I'm describing it might make it sound a bit goofy, but trust me, if you heard this shit at that time in this place you wouldn't be laughing. I never thought to peer out the window because it was on the other side of my room and I was too damn afraid to get out of bed, even more so too afraid to see what the hell was making these noises. This became the norm unfortunately. There would be a few nights every month where I would have to experience this kind of shit, and this one is just where it started. It got a hell of a lot worse for a while. Our house was 2 stories, and there was another night where I heard footsteps downstairs, spaced 3 seconds between each other. They kept getting quieter and quieter. It sounded like someone was going down the stairs. Then it began to sound like someone was stomping on the kitchen's tile floor for a few steps before everything went silent. Then I started hearing those inhuman noises again. I did what I'd always done up to this point and covered my ears so I wouldn't be as affected by those sounds. Then, I made the mistake of uncovering my ears to be greeted with a disembodied whispering voice saying my name. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway. A few minutes passed and I took my hands off my ears, then I immediately heard an angry yell. It was like whatever presence was in the house knew I blocking it out. I kept my ears covered the rest of the night. Every now and then I would work up the courage to check the time and these incidents would happen frequently enough to where the 4 a.m. hour was where it was safe to uncover my ears and whatever was out there would leave. Eventually this stopped for a little while and 8 or 10-year-old me would actually go weeks without terrifying wake-ups. Then I experienced one final one before we moved to Mesa, which was an evil place in a different way. It was infested with Mormons. It was 2:43 a.m. when I woke up. A few minutes passed and none of the scary shit I normally expected to hear happened, so that only made me more uncomfortable. I knew something fucked up was coming. Not too long after, I heard a really loud banging coming from my ceiling that sounded like somebody was violently beating on the house's roof, but there were no sounds on that night aside from that, thankfully. All this shit stopped after we moved out of Apache Junction, and to this day I still try to come up with rational explanations for all of it, but it's still pretty difficult to do so. Once, and once only, I heard that mule-like croaking sound again after moving. Given that I was in full control of my movements, I'm not so sure sleep paralysis is what it was, and I've never had any significant mental health problems, so I doubt that they were hallucinations. Shit was strange for sure.
There have been reports of devil monkeys, which are large baboon-like primates that are now being spotted in the wooded areas of Flagstaff, Arizona. The eyewitness said that she noticed her dog was acting very agitated when they were on their hike through Mount Eldon Forest Trail. when she noticed a small group of primitive-looking creatures scurrying through the rocks. She described them as 4 to 5 feet tall, very quick and agile. These so-called creatures are called devil monkeys in other places of the United States. There have also been other sightings in other states such as New Mexico, Utah and Colorado. Unique breeds of monkey have been described as being about 3 to 4 feet tall, although some eyewitnesses have sworn that these furry fiends can reach a height that is in excess of 7 feet. It seems clear, however, that those who have had an encounter with this larger version of the beast are actually describing a run-in with a prototypical hairy humanoid and not the smaller, more primate-like devil monkey. Unlike the legendarily gorilla-like Bigfoot or Yeti, these creatures, which have been seen throughout the American South and Midwest and as far north as Alaska, have been described as a shaggy, canine-faced baboon-like creatures with powerful, almost kangaroo-like legs, a trait they share with the South America's notorious goatsucker, the chupacabra. Other distinguishing traits that devil monkeys are said to bear include 3-toed, razor-clawed feet, tiny pointed ears and a long, often bushy, tail.
Me and a buddy decide to go camping up on the Mogollon Rim a month or two ago, and am not quite sure what he saw. I have been camping/visiting up there for as long as I can remember, but we kinda wanted our own spot, so we found some old forest roads and went as far back as we could go, but then we hit a fence that said if we crossed we would be on an Indian res. So we drove along the fence for a while, then turned down a trail and found a spot. It was pretty nice, but gave us a kinda weird vibe. We ignored it and set up camp. But the entire time we were there it was ungodly silent. We arrived fairly early in the day, but never heard any birds or anything. We eventually started up a decent fire with the wood I brought, but the entire time it never felt quite right. No crickets or cicadas or anything. By 10 or 11 o'clock I knew shit was really off. We stuck it out until about 1 a.m., but then decided that it was time to get the fuck out. We start packing up quickly, but not really hastily. We are both using our flashlights to scan the trees and whatnot, but I wasn't seeing anything. About 10 minutes after we started though, my friend says, "Throw it in the truck, we gotta get the fuck out of here." So we did. I didn't ask questions until we got on the road for a little bit. When I asked what he saw, he said, it was skinny, very white with very messy hair with long claws or fingernails. It was like peeking around a tree. We went to a family member's cabin and spent the night.
Can confirm about the UFOs. I think it's because we have such clear night skies with unobstructed view of the stars. Same reason there are so many observatories here. I don't even believe in UFOs, but pretty much everyone who lives here has seen some weird shit in the sky at least once. Whether they actually have anything to do with aliens or they're just military aircraft or meteors is another thing, though. Off the top of my head, me and my dad saw a huge fireball traveling overhead at relatively slow speeds just before dark. I assume it was a very low-flying meteor, but definitely looked strange. It was close enough that you could see the actual flames and the mass of the object. Both parents and younger sister reported seeing a bizarre streak of light across the sky when looking at the stars, described as basically a line arcing across the whole sky instantaneously and all at once, as if drawn on the inside of a hemisphere, 2 or 3 times. Unfortunately, I missed that one, but it's the thing I'm most curious about. When I was around 4 years old, my parents say they came into my room and found me staring transfixed out the window. Apparently I told them I was watching a UFO. My poor mom thought I was abducted by aliens, but I have no memory of it. Both parents lived in Phoenix at the time of the famous UFO sighting, and remember it clearly. They describe it about the same as everyone else. plus all your other standard weird lights in the sky scenarios that seem to move in odd ways, but those aren't as memorable. But really, I think if you ask pretty much any Arizonan about it, they'll have at least one similar story, especially up north at higher elevation and away from big cities. I'd be curious to hear others. As for other spooky things, there's a pretty famous supposedly haunted hotel in Jerome. Never been there myself though, and don't believe in ghosts, so I'd be inclined to think it's just tourist bullshit. As others have said, the lava tubes are cool too.
Scottsdale, friend here. About 15 or so years ago I was in the Boy Scouts, and I went on the yearly camping trip with my troop. Everyone brought family with, so my dad and my brother came with. Upon arriving, we camped somewhere up north. My brother got sick and my dad had to leave, leaving 12-year-old me to set a tent up by myself. I didn't have the wind cover for it, so when I was laying down I was staring right at the sky. Few days into the trip I woke up in the middle of the night. It's windy, suddenly the wind stops and it gets eerily quiet. I looked at the sky and I saw a triangle-shaped object that had 3 orange lights on each corner. It hovered around in the sky and stopped for a few seconds before it flew away. Shortly after I saw the same thing, but it had green lights instead. Shit was crazy, and I still wonder what I saw to this day.
I grew up in Sierra Vista, Arizona, like 4 miles from the border. The Huachuca Mountains are a very strange place, but then again, so is Cochi's stronghold. The only /X/related experience I've ever had was in the desert between Sierra Vista and Tombstone. If anyone has ever been down there, you will know that the whole area gives off an entirely inhospitable vibe, especially at night. It just feels fucking dangerous. Anyway, be me, camping overnight with a few friends about 20 miles into the desert between Sierra Vista and Tombstone. We are on a very remote but nice stretch of the San Pedro River. I drove, so I am the only sober one in the bunch, mostly just there to fuck my GF. It's about 2 a.m., everybody starts winding down, 4 of us are just sitting around the fire talking. Suddenly we hear screaming, and what sounds like someone running through about knee-deep water. It's getting closer, started about 50 or so feet away, now at about 15. A woman's voice starts frantically screaming in native Apache, only know this because one of my friends is half Apache. The screaming stops suddenly after what sounded like a groan, think someone getting punched in the stomach. Almost immediately after it stops, it starts up again 50 feet away. Goes through the exact same sequence, it's like an audio loop. Freaked the fuck out, we leave after the 5th repeat. I asked my friend what the voice was saying, and he said it sounded like a woman getting killed.
Got a couple. Both happened out at Rio Verde, those from Phoenix should know. Keep in mind this happened a long time ago, before they completely renovated the place, paved some paths and opened it up for all the snowbirds and transplants. My buddies and I were out across the river and a couple miles out and were drinking around the campfire and just bullshitting. Around 1 or 2 we decide to head into town, so go to put the fire out. Now what we usually do when we put a fire out is afterwards just sit in silence for 10 to 15 minutes in the woods, just listening to the silence and sitting in the darkness. Cool to creep yourself out or look at the stars. So we put the fire out and are just sitting in silence. Finally my buddy speaks up and says it's about time to go, so we all get up. Suddenly my friend turns the lantern on and starts going fuck what the fuck. I turn around just in time to see a white, hairless creature about waist height take off into the darkness. What was real unsettling to me was how it moved, kind of galloping, hopping, but with weird joints. Where its knees should have been, they were bent the opposite, like the joints in the legs operated completely differently. Freaked us all the fuck out and we quickly jumped in our buddy's truck and got the fuck out of there. Could have been just a diseased rabbit or coyote, but we all felt real unsettled just by looking at it. One more story I have from the same night. It happened just before this event when we first got to the site and also creeped us out. At around 10-ish we had crossed the river and hiked out to the site we liked to chill at. This site was unique in that it was a sort of crossroads for two different paths that headed out towards the hills in the east. We had set up and decided it would be cool to head down the trail we hadn't explored yet that followed the river. This was in the spring, so there was tall, maybe knee-high grass around the path, which was covered by the branches of the low-hanging trees that tend to grow around riverbeds. Anyways, we are about 5 minutes down the path when suddenly a man stumbles up and over the riverbank and stops in front of us, about 20 meters out. Every single one of us paused and are sort of surprised to see another person out here, as we didn't see any cars parked along the trail and hadn't heard any music or talking in the distance. This man is still standing there, staring down the path towards us, when suddenly two more people stumble out from where he came from and come to a stop next to him. The three of them are now all staring down the path at us. The creepy thing is that they were not talking to each other or even acknowledging each other, just staring down the path. I hissed, "Oh, what the fuck," to my friends, who all whispered that this felt really wrong. The three in front of us started walking down the path towards us, still without speaking or communicating to each other in any way. Then, as soon as they started walking towards us, more people started coming over the bank behind them and wordlessly started walking down the path towards us. Including myself, there were 5 of us, and at this point it looked like there was close to 25 of them. My buddy suddenly said, "Fuck this," and started walking straight at the group, silently approaching us, and we instinctively followed behind. My flight or fight instincts had kicked, filling me with adrenaline. When we finally met on the path, I saw that the people in the group were not looking at us, but rather through us. Still completely silent and without acknowledging our presence or breaking their gaze down the path, this group of what I could now see were all men in their early 20s moved around us and continued back down the path towards the entrance to the area. Still pumped full of adrenaline and feeling uneasy, my buddies and I all stopped and watched the last of them turn the corner and disappear out of sight. The weirdest thing we realized was that not only were they not talking to each other, but also that they made no noise when they walked. For a group that large, you would expect to hear them break the grass along the path or hear the snapping of sticks on the path, but they didn't. Also, we wondered how the hell all those people got out here without leaving their cars parked somewhere that we would have noticed. Best we could guess was that they were some weird church group doing rituals or some nonsense out here. Either way, the entire situation was really unsettling and made us decide to bring our handguns next time we headed out there.
At the time this story takes place, I was about 6 years old, and for a long time I thought all of this just was a weird dream I had. But some months ago my mom confessed to me that it was very real, so here we go. Back in 1996, my mom and my uncle lived in a town in Arizona. I really don't remember the name and I have never bothered to ask. You see, I only lived there about a year and I hardly remember anything. I am Colombian. Just like my mom, and we immigrated illegally to the US. We were going through some harsh times, so we lived some time with my uncle there. He was a very kind man and he always made sure I was as happy as possible. I remember we lived in a quite large house in a semi-rural area and I would spend all day playing around outside. One day while I was playing around I saw something that looked like a bear, but it wasn't that big to be a bear, and was too small to be a dog. I immediately yelled, "Mira mami un oso." "Look mom, a bear." She quickly got out and grabbed me to take me inside the house while she yelled for my uncle to come out with a gun. I don't remember much about that day. But one thing I remember clearly is that when the bear turned around he had a human face, and was smiling from ear to ear. It then stood up in 2 legs and started running like a human. We all quickly got inside the house and prayed for hours. My mother was terrified. At that time I really couldn't understand, and when I asked my mom about it, she just told me,
"What are you talking about? That was probably a dream. It must be for watching so much TV."
Eventually I forgot about it and for years didn't even think about it, and now I am an adult. But 6 months ago the memory suddenly came to my mind and decided I was going to ask my mom about it, so I called her. I told her, "Hey mom, so my memory kind of suddenly crossed my mind the other day," and started telling her about the memory. She kept silent for many seconds before she started crying and telling me that yes, in fact we saw something out of this world that day. A demon, she called it. She told me that she always lied to me because she feared that memory would haunt my childhood. I still don't know what I saw that day. I don't know if I saw a demon or something else, but at least I know it wasn't a dream. I now live in Colombia and have a wife, and I hope I never see something like that ever again.
I have an original story. Not that scary, but I've never been able to forget it. I would have been 16 at this time back when I lived in a small town in Arizona. I was chilling in my room reading a book. My cat was sleeping next to me. I was really absorbed in this book when all of a sudden a somewhat loud noise on my roof scared the shit out of me. I lived at the end of the house and the noise started exactly right over where my head would have been. My first thought was it was my cat, but then I remembered that he was next to me. And I look over and he is wide awake on all fours staring his ass off at the spot where the noise had come from. He didn't take his eyes off of the spot at all. That's when I started getting a really bad feeling. I tried thinking quickly of what it could be. Maybe a friend. Because the corner of the house I was in was also right next to a shed, which would have allowed someone to get onto the roof if there were a really good jumper. But their legs would have probably bumped the sides of the house as well. Not to mention I would probably have heard something getting on the trailer if they were average height. In the minute I was thinking what the fuck that could have been, and my cat continued staring. Whatever it was moved, slow steps, taking 3 to 5 seconds with each step. Living in a crappy trailer, I could tell this thing was heavier than when I've heard my mom and dad on the roof fixing the cooler. That's when my heart just drops because something that heavy shouldn't have been able to get on my roof without making more noise. It continues walking slow as fuck over the area where the hallway was. All this time my cat is just staring at the exact area where it would be, which just freaks me out even more. It continues over the hallway towards the kitchen and very close to the living room. That's when my 2 dogs, badass Fela German Shepherd mix, go insane. They've never done that if a deer or another dog was outside, so I'm freaking out. Once my dogs go all vicious, the walking just stops. My dogs continue to wail for 1 minute, then suddenly just stop and my cat just lays back down like nothing happened. The noise doesn't continue, which really fucks with my brain, which is already in overdrive trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. My trailer would have been standing at about 15 feet and the only way for that thing to get down was jump off without making a loud thud when it hit the ground. Or if it had walked back to my area and used the shed to help. So I'm wondering if whatever is up there is still there. I get up and can't help but satisfy my curiosity. I open my door and whisper for Jag and Tonka. I'm surprised no one else in my house is up and awake after their wailing. I grab a heavy flashlight, mostly for killing purposes, from the cupboard and go to the door in the hallway that was just walked over. I turn on the floodlight and question if I should do this. I say fuck it and open the door and my dogs burst outside. I take a deep breath and pretty much jump over the porch, not wanting to be near the edge of the house. When I land on the ground, I see my dogs are running around sniffing the ground like crazy. They actually pick up a scent and look at me wanting to chase it. I don't let them. I shine my flashlight on the roof. but I see nothing but the cooler. This just kills me inside. Because whatever this was would have had to jump off the house. I've done that before, but I had to hang off the edge to make sure I didn't break anything. I nope the fuck back inside. My dogs are reluctant as hell to go back in because they are excited by the scent. Finally coax them back in, lock the door and go and sit in my bed trying to get some idea of what it could have been. 6 years later I still think about that shit. It never happened again. I'm glad I moved away the next year. Always weird shit happening at that place. Especially since I lived next to state land.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.